Our next guest is from ABC, ESPN. She joined ESPN in 1994 and has done NFL, college football, college basketball, softball, soccer, volleyball, probably more. Those are the ones I can tell you off the top of my head. But let me make sure that I've got the Beth that we had in here.
How you doing, John?
Well, you figured it out. You didn't need my help. Beth, thank you so much. We're so eager to have you participate. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate my spot in the lineup. I'm well protected with Nance in front of me and Harlan behind me, so that's a good thing.
We need the ability to get on base and steal some bases, so the field is perfect for you.
It's all about offense. Got to score.
So if you could, Beth, we'd like to start out by asking you to state a 30-second summary of how you went from college campus to ESPN.
All right. Well, it all started really, from day one. And I always wanted to be a sportscaster. And this actually is my wallet that I carry around with me. And in my wallet, I still have this when I was watching Phyllis George on the NFL Today show in the mid-'70s. And I asked my mom if I could be a sportscaster, and she said, yes, you can. So I carry that with me. And then through some trials and tribulations in my teenage and college years, from a lot of great advice and from a lot of great supportive family, don't be afraid of anything, especially in the uncomfortable situations that you can find yourself in, and the importance of putting yourself in those situations so you become much more comfortable. My dad was a high school teacher and a basketball coach. I had 3 brothers, and all the little kids in the neighborhood were sports fans. My mom was a sports fan. And so I literally grew up in the gymnasium and the fields around North Syracuse High School. I see a lot of upstate New Yorkers in the house today at Syracuse and Ithaca and Cornell and such. So I was a public address announcer for high school games while I was still in middle school. And I, eventually worked at the local radio stations and all through college, and then coming back to Syracuse for grad school. I was similar to Jim Nance, working at the local television affiliates. I worked at the CBS affiliate with Mike Tirico, Ian Eagle, Dave Ryan was around, Dave Pash was around. We had an amazing group of people. And the other guy that was there was a guy by the name of John Eves. And so he left TV to start his own radio station. And that's how I got my start. All week long, I was sports director, news director, morning DJ, jack of all trades. And then on the weekends, I would be working in local TV, pulling cables, being a runner, doing whatever it took, bugging people to try and get on the air. And then ultimately that led to the play-by-play side of things. I really felt like that was my calling, and that's what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, I just tried out everything else. I was in the studio, I was on the sideline, I was color, whatever they asked me to do. Never say no for no particular reason. There's always a good person that you'll meet, a good contact that you could make, a good lesson to be learned. And then I eventually moved on to Big East basketball, UConn basketball, and then in the early 90s on to ESPN, where I was fortunate enough to arrive at a time when they were doing a lot more women's sports on TV. And so being the only female play-by-play at the time, I got a lot of calls to do a lot of the women's sports. And then ultimately you start moving into football and lacrosse and men's basketball. And I've been very fortunate to, I think, put myself in positions to get lucky, put myself in positions to be in the conversation when jobs came up, and fortunate enough to work hard to land some of those.
Luck is the residue of design, Beth.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's open it up to our audience. We will start with Olivia Conte. Please hang on a second. Let me unmute you. State your school, your affiliation, whichever is appropriate, and your question.
Hi, Beth. I'm Olivia. I am a junior at Syracuse. I've actually seen you speak a couple of times when you've come to visit WAER, among other things. But my question for you is, if you are looking, like I'm looking to be a reporter, a sideline reporter, in your experience, who have been some of the people that you've worked with and their traits that have really stood out to you, and what makes a good sideline reporter?
Well, I'm biased towards a lot of the people that I work with at ESPN and ABC. Certainly, the way that Doris Burke handles the WNBA finals, anything that Holly Rowe does, I would watch what she does. We have a marvelous group of reporters, and I think the big thing, we used to have a seminar. John Sawatsky was a legendary interviewer in our business, and every year we would have a seminar as sort of reminders, not only for reporters, but for anybody who may be doing interviews, whether it's from the studio or from the booth. How and why questions are the two most important words to have in your repertoire, and those elicit the best kind of answers. You don't want to keep things open-ended. You try and avoid at every opportunity to avoid saying things like, would you talk about? That leaves it way too open for them to take it in any direction. So questions that start with how and why are the best ones. And then trying to figure out how to make those conversational and how to make those really pointed. When I was working on the sideline a lot, and I knew I had a pregame interview, I would get a lot of information from what the analyst and the play-by-play announcer thought were the important storylines. Coming up to a halftime interview, I'd be really listening intently to what the analyst and play-by-play were talking about in terms of what the significant moments were or the big things that were going on in the game. And then I would incorporate those into my questions. I really might have one or two things written down in advance, but a lot of times it's off the cuff and based on what may have just happened the last play of the half or the last play of the game. You've got to be light on your feet and ready to change gears and even change the point of your interview or your interviewee based on what's just happened. But, a lot of the women that we have and the guys that we have at ESPN and ABC are fabulous.
Next question from Adam Gotkin. Adam, thank you for being here. Please state either your school, your affiliation, or where you are participating from, and then your question.
Thank you so much for hosting this, John, and thank you for being on, Beth. I'm a high school broadcaster over in Montgomery County, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. I created my own radio station at my school last year. And at the same time, I'm still an athlete, still play for me lacrosse. And Beth, and I know you used to play basketball, and I was wondering how much that helped out your career being an athlete and I guess being able to connect to players and also how you call games.
I think, Adam, it's helped out tremendously, and I've always felt that gave me an advantage, and you will probably find similar experiences as you transition from player to broadcaster, that I knew what it was like in a huddle. I knew what it was like in the locker room. I knew what it felt like to have the ball in your hands in a decisive moment. And so all of those things I was able to incorporate into how we interviewed coaches and players pregame. We interviewed coaches and players postgame. One of my favorite moments as a broadcaster, I was actually working on the sideline still for the Bryce Drew shot in the NCAA men's tournament. And having been a coach's kid myself, I knew that the question to ask was, like all of us, we've made that shot that Bryce Drew hit to beat the buzzer in our driveways or down at the park 1,000 times. So I had been in those shoes, and he actually had an opportunity to play that out. And that was how our whole conversation, our whole interview went. So I think from that standpoint, being a student athlete was a tremendous boost. And also, like you referenced, I think it gave me a big advantage in terms of already having a base knowledge of the language of the sport and the vocabulary of the sport. And that's one thing I think, when you're first starting out and you may want to have the versatility of learning a lot of different sports, just by watching the game on television, just by talking to a field hockey coach, a tennis player. I didn't know how to call those sports, but I figured it out by watching it on TV, listening to other pros do it, by talking to coaches and players. and developing a comfort around the language of sports or events that you may not know a whole lot about, but you can pick up in a hurry. So definitely being in the field of play on the court was a big advantage, because you also know your way around the personnel. And that is very important, whether you're a play-by-play, an analyst, or a sideline. You need to know the right people to talk to before the game even starts to collect valuable pieces of information. And as quick as you can make yourself comfortable in those situations, the better off you'll be.
Adam, thank you for the question. Let's go next to Carlo Jimenez. Carlo, I know your affiliation, but state it for the group, please, and ask your question of Beth.
Yeah, thank you, John, for putting this on and having us on. I'm a freshman at the University of Southern California, and thank you, Beth, for coming on. My question was, I'm sure you get a lot of tapes and reels to look at, and is there one specific aspect that maybe a young broadcaster can have that elevates them from kind of being in that level of a just out of college or in college broadcaster? Have a lot of us sometimes sound the same, or there are key elements or aspects that make you sound not like a just out of college kid or kid in college broadcasting?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a couple of things, Carlo, that I still consider paramount. First and foremost, you have to find your voice, because if you want to have an extended career in this, you want to do it your way. You want to do it with your voice, and you want to feel comfortable. So that first and foremost is the thing that I really rely on. I got some great advice when I was younger. I was actually not a broadcast journalism major. I went back and got my master's in it, but I was an English major. So as much reading and writing as you can do, I heard Jim Nantz talking about his love affair with language, and I am of a similar ilk. And I love my thesaurus and dictionary.com apps on my phone, because I love finding new and interesting ways to be as descriptive as possible. One of the things that Adam is doing well is starting out on radio, because radio, you have to be a lot more descriptive. There's a lot more language and vocabulary is involved. Obviously on TV, you're not talking quite as much, but it helps you find an economy of words as well, which is critical on television. A couple of other things, you need to learn how to lay out. You guys, for a lot of you younger folks, you're growing up in the days of gaming and the days of a lot of loud voices and a lot of shouting. And I am of the old school where less is better in critical situations and critical moments. So getting a feel for when you need to lay out. Some of my greatest stuff, I like to brag, is when I'm not saying a word. And then the last thing, Carlo, is it is still very much an audio-visual medium. So you want to look your best. You want to feel your best. And even though I would agree with something else that Jim Nantz talked about, the actual on-camera stuff is some of the least favorite things that we do. But nonetheless, on a tape, and if you're sending out your resume tapes, that tends to be the first thing people notice, is what you look like and what you sound like. So you want to be at your best for those moments. That first impression is critical.
Thank you, Carlo. Let's go to Mohammed Ahmad. Thank you for being here, Mohammed. Please state your affiliation and your question.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thank you so much for doing this, John. Beth, it's so good to hear from you. I've enjoyed watching you all these years. My question for you is, so I just graduated from the University of Kentucky in December, and I'll be starting a new job in Missoula, Montana as a TV anchor and reporter, and also doing some play-by-play for local high schools and some University of Montana sports over there. So with that said, I feel pretty good about the anchoring aspect and reporting, since I did a lot of that in school, but I didn't do a lot of play-by-play and sideline reporting. I did some radio here locally, and I did a few D3 games for a small college close to Lexington. So for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience, I guess my question is, how can I sort of jump in without being like super unprepared for such a big jump?
Yeah. I once applied for a job in Missoula, Montana, Mohammed. Your route is a little similar to mine. And for a lot of us, my first job was in Homer, New York, outside of Syracuse. So there is something definitely to be said for lack of a better term, finding an outpost where you can learn and grow and make some mistakes that aren't necessarily on national television. There are a couple of things you can do, and this is one of the things that I did when I was first starting out too, is you can take your phone and just put it on record and go sit in the bleachers for a basketball game, go to a minor league baseball game and sit in the cheap seats and just work on your call. I would also encourage you to watch a lot of different sports, because that is how you can kind of pick up what we call in the business contour and flow. You know, when am I supposed to be talking as a play-by-play or an analyst? I like to say I sketch the outline and the color commentator is the color guy because he gets to fill in all the colors. I'm the who, what, when, and where. The analyst is more the how and the why. So I try and, formulate conversations with an analyst based on those sort of baseline premises. I think there's a lot to be said about starting out in radio, because you do have to talk more. You do have to be more descriptive. You do have to use a lot more names and numbers and time and score. And then you can kind of, let a lot of that stuff fall to the wayside as you're starting out in television. But there is no replacement for practice. I'm a huge believer in Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. The more repetition you get, the better off you are. And for people that want to be a host, or for people that want to do play-by-play, I would literally spend some time. I would tape a picture of the front of a camera and stick it on a mirror at home, and either grab my little brother or just pretend there was somebody standing next to me. And I would literally practice my open, because that is the most uncomfortable thing that we do. And those kinds of things help me feel much more comfortable in situations. I don't like to memorize an entire situation. I write down a lot of bullet points. I write down a lot of things that sort of help me flow in and out in those types of situations. And, those are the places where you can get a lot of experience in on your own to make yourself feel more comfortable when you actually have an opportunity to do it yourself.
Let's go next to Dylan Pescator. Please state your affiliation, school, employer, or your location and your question.
Hey guys, I'm Dylan Pescator. I'm going to Arizona State next year as a freshman. Just decided on that. It's going to be a fun time over there. Beth, thank you for coming on for us. Actually, Carlo took my question before, so I had to come up with a new one. Just with the resume thing and giving your reel out, something that stands out, or really something that maybe younger people can work on as they're moving on through the industry. You talked about like the shoutcasters thing, something to keep you reserved when there's big moments going on.
Mm-hmm. The big thing I think is what we always try and do pregame is we get the right mix in our headset, and I like a lot of natural sound, nat sound as we say. And so as a fan of the games, as a player growing up, I kind of know what I want. Dylan, you probably know what you like when you're sitting at home on the couch. I want to be there. I want to hear the crowd. I want to see, somebody in the audience chewing on their fingernails. But I don't necessarily want somebody describing that to me. I want to see it and hear it. And so it's kind of a feel that you develop. I don't want to steal their moment. It's not about me. It's about the athlete on the field having their moment. So you want to, I remember Joe Buck's dad, I think it was the Cardinals in the World Series years ago. Somebody hit a walk-off home run in the World Series and there was going to be a Game 7 the next day. And his call was literally, "See you tomorrow," as the ball is flying out of the stadium. So I don't like to rehearse anything like that. I like to have maybe an idea, but it sort of evolves as the game goes on. And you don't want to step over. You want to get in and get out, I guess, is the best way for me to describe it, Dylan. You want to put a stamp on it and describe the significance of it without overwhelming that moment, and allow the crowd to tell us what it's like to be there. Allow the director in the truck and the producer to take us with those close face, those close-ups of faces in the crowd, to run in the replay again in slow-mo to watch the reaction of it all. And just little nuggets, little snippets, I don't want my voice to be the moment. I want their running around the bases or their celebration in the end zone to be the moment.
Good question. Let's go to Dan Pfeiffer. Please state your affiliation and your question, Dan.
Just making sure I'm unmuted here. Hi, Beth. Thank you for joining us today, and also thank you for the shout out on Twitter. I have actually also followed in your footsteps with public address announcing. I've been the PA announcer for Marquette University soccer programs for the last 13 years. On the play-by-play side, have done more of the high school football. I'm one of the main broadcasters in the Milwaukee and Madison markets for the iHeart stations. I've had the chance to do 9 state championships over the last 7 years, and it's been great. I actually, you gave me a shout out on Twitter yesterday. Thank you very much for that. And as I mentioned there, I have a question for you about soccer, because I feel like it's the one sport where you still find a lot of variation between broadcasters, particularly among American broadcasters. I also think it's really challenging to call TV-wise, because you have to find a balance between, like you've talked about, letting the pictures do the talking and not saying too much versus saying too little, such that American fans who still may not necessarily always understand what a good cross is or a good run is, still appreciate the strategy and the effort. So I'm wondering kind of how you approach that, what you think makes a good soccer broadcast, and who some of the soccer broadcasters you appreciate are and who you emulate.
Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I'm a huge Premier League fan, and I watch Arlo White every weekend religiously, NBC Sports. He's a guy that I would record those shows and just keep listening back. Soccer's interesting because the ball moves so rapidly, and you only have a certain amount of people on screen. You know, the big thing with calling play-by-play on television is you really are only talking about what the folks at home are seeing. Obviously, we have the talk back button in front of us to say, hey, I'd really like to talk about the coach right now. Can you give me a shot of him? But when we do a soccer match, first and foremost, there are, 2 parts of the field, right? There's the box, and then there's the rest of the field. And when the ball gets close to the box, you are all play-by-play on the action and ready to hopefully call the one and only goal that'll be scored that day. And then the rest of the field is where you can kind of talk a little bit more about strategy, where you can drop in an occasional story on a player out there. The big thing with soccer is a lot of it develops off screen. So one of the challenges for me, Dan, is blending how much I'm calling the game off the screen and how much I'm watching the field. And that's really a challenge in every sport. But I want to be able to see the buildup even when the ball's on the left side and I can see that action is about to happen in the middle or on the right side of the field. I want to make sure that I am prepared to identify who's coming in and, sort of whether or not it's a good cross or a bad cross or whether or not the analyst needs to pop in here and let us know a nugget about what's happening.
Dan, thank you for the question. Let's go next to Emma Tiedemann. Emma, thank you for being here. Please state your affiliation and your question.
Hi, Beth. I'm Emma Tiedemann. I'm the play-by-play voice of the Portland Sea Dogs in Portland, Maine, AA affiliate of the Boston Red Sox. My question is, what do you look for and critique the most when you go back and listen to your tape and previous games?
Well, thank you for the question, Emma. And I think probably, first of all, I like to watch back our broadcast every once in a while. And in particular for college football, a lot of times now with the technology, you have the opportunity to actually watch the game while you're heading back to the airport or whether you're sitting around on the plane. And so usually what I look for are things that, like Jim Nantz was talking about, there's always an occasion where you wish you could have described something a little differently or a little bit better. A lot of times, though, it is a situation or a moment where our whole team could have done something a little different or a little better. Because as a former player, that's kind of how I approach the broadcast as a member of the team. And my job as a play-by-play announcer, I think, is to try and help everyone around me get better and do their best. And that's how I try and approach the game. But usually when we go back and over the course of the football season, our producer will clip shots of certain things and send them all to us. And we'll have conversations during the week about, this replay or describing this rule a little bit better, or, talking about how we could have maybe incorporated the sideline analyst a little bit differently. So those are the things that we look for in terms of how we can get our team a little bit better. I will add this too, Emma, your situation, and actually a couple of other people who we've already talked to. If you want to be a play-by-play announcer, minor league baseball, I think, is the place to be right now. And it goes back to what I talked about in terms of getting reps. You're in a small town. You can grow and learn and get better without, a gazillion people watching. And you have a lot of repetition. How many games will you get to call this summer? Or how many games would you have gotten to call this summer? 40 or 50 maybe? So there's a lot of repetition there in minor league baseball. And that is a really good place to put together a good resume tape and a good jumping off point, as well as the fact that there are jobs in AA and AAA and the major leagues. There's a whole minor league system there with a lot of radio and television already built in.
Emma, I appreciate you being here. Thank you. I'm trying to split the questions up among people who haven't had a chance to ask one yet, but I am going to make an exception here. So Tara Lynch, you have a question for Beth, and I want to make sure you get a chance to ask it.
Thank you so much, John. Beth, it's great to meet you virtually. I'm a big fan. I'm a sophomore at Ithaca College. I'm doing play-by-play anchoring reporting for Ithaca College Television as well as ESPN Plus at Cornell University. So thank you. One question I have for you, what was it like breaking through as a female in the sports industry? And could you speak a little bit about that process?
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, Tara, one of the first places I broke in was the Cortica Jug Games. I was on the other side of that rivalry. I worked in Homer and Cortland, New York. And so one of my, still to this day, fondest memories, we had a box. It was literally as big as a person that we would have to lug up into the press box in order to call the games. Thank goodness the technology has changed along with the times. But I was really fortunate to have wonderful guys around me as mentors, as coworkers, as people that didn't really care who you were or where you came from. They were open-minded enough to give you an opportunity to prove yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing. The most important thing that you guys will all find is wanting to earn the respect of the people that you work with. And the way I describe it whenever I go and talk to students that are still in college is take a look around the room. Take a look around this virtual room right now, because these are a lot of the people that you might be working with one day. There might be somebody in this room right now that may want to hire you to do a job one day. So the importance of being open-minded and being willing to learn and being aggressive. You know, another thing I heard Jim talking about earlier was it's okay to be ambitious. And for a lot of young people, myself included, I was actually quite shy around people I didn't know when I was younger. And I really had to work to put myself out there. And I really had to work at not being afraid to ask people questions on how I can get better. And that's one of the things that, you know, not today, for example, in this forum, but it's okay to reach out other people in the business that you look up to. We love to help. We love to answer questions that we can. And I'll just show you this because I also saw Jim had his NFL game boards. And a few years ago when I got the gig to call the Oakland Raiders preseason games, Jim and Tony were just starting out, and they were a few booths down from us doing a rehearsal game. Think of that. Even in this day and age, you still do a rehearsal game. When I did Monday Night Football, we did several rehearsal games. It's important to get a feel for one another and to get better. But this is a game board that Jim Nantz gave to me. And the idea here is we love giving back. We love helping each other out when we can. Jim stayed in the booth that day at the Oakland Coliseum for an hour before the game, and we just talked the craft. and we talked the business of football, and we talked about a lot of different things. The other thing I encourage you is to know a little bit about a lot, because those are all conversation starters. Don't just read the sports page. Know a little bit about pop culture. Watch The Last Dance. Watch Succession so you can have conversations with people. Know a little bit about music right now. Know a little bit about politics right now so that you can start or be involved with conversations and get to know people, because at the base of it, Tara, this is still very much a people business. I have never been hired by a stranger. It's always been somebody either that I've worked with or that I know through the business, or a friend of a friend through the business. And that is critical. You guys, it's never too early to start building relationships that may help you get a job one day.
Know a little bit about a lot. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go next to Vashon Jones. Vashon, I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Please state your affiliation and your question for Beth.
How you doing, John? Appreciate you. And Beth Mowins, you are doing a wonderful job. I've watched you over the years through college football and through the NFL. You're doing wonderful. I am the sports information director at Oklahoma Community College in Clarksdale, Mississippi. We compete in the MAC-JC conference, one of the toughest conferences in junior college football and in all sports. But at the same time, I've been in the business for 14 years. So we're kind of in the same boat. I did a lot of, basically I've been a jack of all trades, writing, editing, broadcasting, all that good stuff. But my question to you, and I know it's kind of a tough business because a lot of competition. And I know it was a little tough for you because, you know, it was kind of tough back in the days for females to break in. But I know it's tough for African Americans as well to try to break in. Did you have a moment in your career that you got kind of discouraged a little bit in trying to advance? And what moment that made you come back from that little setback or being discouraged at that time?
Yeah. Well, Vashon, a couple of things. First and foremost is I always wanted to do this, and I honestly never wanted to do anything else. So there was no fallback position. And a lot of people in this business, a lot of the play-by-play people that I know come from a similar background or situation where if there was a moment where I was too frustrated to continue doing this and I had something else to go do, I probably would have done it. But the fact that I was pretty focused and pretty committed to doing this and only this, that helped a lot with overcoming some of the tough times. I think the biggest thing, and again, I'll go back to something that Jim talked about, I think with Tara, was the versatility that you also mentioned. And even though I knew I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer, there were times younger in my career where I was the woman on the job, and they said, well, can you do sideline for us? There were situations where there were two of us that could do play-by-play, but only one of us that could analyze. So Beth, why don't you go be the analyst? And there were moments where it was very frustrating where I may have only been working on football and men's basketball as a sideline reporter. And first and foremost, that is the toughest job in the business. And you better want it if you want to be a sideline reporter, because there is a lot behind the scenes that goes into that. And so I worked hard on that craft, but my heart wasn't in it, and I always knew that play-by-play was what I wanted to do. But again, it goes back to maintaining relationships. And if this is the only way I'm going to stay on this show and prove to you how good I am and how valuable I am, yes, I'll go to the sideline. But I may also pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, I really enjoy being on the sideline, but next time, can I get a shot at doing some play-by-play? And quite often that was the situation where you maintain your versatility and you do some things that you may necessarily not want to be doing in 25 years. But you know what? Today, this is where I need to be and what I need to do to continue to further my career.
Vashon, thank you. Let's go to Ryan Urquhart. Please state, I know your affiliation, but for everybody else, state that and your question.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, John, first of all, for putting this on, and thank you, Beth, for being here. I'm a play-by-play broadcaster based out of Tampa. I'm part of the radio team at the University of Florida, as well as working for Vinix Sports Group, which is basically an umbrella company for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and working for a company within that, doing play-by-play. So first, I just wanted to share some Cortland love. I did a summer of baseball in Cortland a couple years ago and really fell in love with that town, so big shout-out to Cortland. I did my first, so my question is, I did my first SEC Plus broadcast recently. I'm graduating from Florida here in May, and I found that the biggest challenge for me was creating a story arc through the course of an inning or through the course of a broadcast, and not kind of just nugget hopping. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom for how to craft a storyline specifically through a TV broadcast to where it can sound smooth and you're not sort of disrupting any pitches or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the Cortland shout out. And I also spent 10 years down in Tampa covering a lot of Florida sports with the old Sunshine Sports. There's a terrific pedigree of people in broadcasting that have come out of Tampa. I think for television, a big thing is, you know, I saw Jim with his game boards and a lot of the information that you have in front of you for a game, and there is absolutely no excuse for not being prepared. I like to write a lot of stuff down just to have in front of me in case, you know, probably 90% of the things we write down on our game boards, we don't necessarily get to. If it's a good game, you're just talking about the game. But for example, for TV and storytelling, I will pregame when we have our production meeting. We'll come up with 4 or 5 things that we absolutely want to talk about during the course of the game in terms of stories. And I will keep that sheet in front of me during a game. Sometimes we might even plan out when we're going to do it. Hey, let's talk about this the next time or the second time that Joe Schmo comes up to bat. You know, there are moments in a game, obviously, when there's a free throw or when it's, you know, 1st and 10, where you can start to get into your stories a little bit more. But a lot of that is coordinated with the analyst, with the director, with the producer, say during a timeout or during the commercial break, where, hey, next possession, for example, or next at bat, we got the top of the order coming up. So let's tell the story about, you know, how these 3 kids have batting cages in their backyard and they all go all summer long to, you know, to Sally Schmo's batting cage and work on their games. So I would say, you know, I have a list of 4 or 5 things, the big stories that either I want to tell or the analyst wants to tell, or we absolutely know the people at home want to hear about. And we will make sure during a timeout or a TV break, or even on our production list, we are definitely going to talk about this story. So the producer knows to cut to the coach on the sideline. The director knows that his son, who is the offensive coordinator, is up in the booth. He knows to get the camera guys ready to cut to the son up in the booth. And myself and the analyst, I know to steer the analyst towards a conversation about Jeremy Schmo and his dad, the head coach, and what it was like for them growing up and having all these coaches around the dinner table and telling that story. So I would say coordination with your whole team is a big part of that storytelling. And then, you know, one of the things that we always laugh about is you can get into a great story, or you can start talking about something and then the game gets in the way. And you have to pivot to, you know, the 60-yard touchdown that just happened on 1st and 10 instead of your conversation about Jeremy and Joe Schmo.
Yeah.
Beth, thank you so very much for carving out time and sharing your wisdom. We all appreciate it. Certainly me first and foremost. Thank you a ton.
Thank you very much, John, for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.